Hi, my name's Silas. And this story didn't start the night my stepdad shoved my wife to the floor in front of the whole family. No, it started long before that, when I was a boy being told to stay quiet, don't stir things up, be a good son, even when it meant being erased. But that night, Christmas Eve, when he pointed at me like I was nothing and said, "This seat is for my real son," something in me finally broke. He thought I'd just walk away again. He didn't know that before the night was over, I'd uncover the one thing that would shatter every lie he built. And the next morning, he'd wake up to 73 missed calls. But by then, it'd already be too late. What kind of man turns a family into a weapon? And what does it take to finally stop him? Let me tell you what happened. The cold hit my face the moment Elara and I stepped out of the car. Christmas lights blinked along the porch rail, but they never felt welcoming to me. Every year I came back to this house with the same tight feeling in my chest, like I was bracing for something I couldn't name. Elara slid her hand into mine and gave it a light squeeze, her voice barely above a whisper as we walked toward the door. "We'll get through tonight. Just breathe." I nodded, though my stomach was already knotted. I had spent most of my life trying to avoid disappointing this family, especially my stepfather, Harlan. It never worked. Inside, warm air and loud voices wrapped around us. The long dining table dominated the living room, glowing under the soft chandelier. I glanced toward the spot where I always sat. My chair wasn't there. Instead, a cheap wooden one sat pushed toward the window, out of line with the rest of the expensive set my mother bought years ago. Every other seat matched perfectly. Mine looked like it had been dragged in from the garage at the last minute. My jaw tightened, though I tried not to show it. A few relatives offered half-hearted nods before turning away. They always treated me like background noise, someone who didn't quite fit. Elara caught my eye and gave me a soft smile meant to steady me. It helped, but only a little. Across the room, Harlan's laugh carried over everyone else's. He stood tall near the bar cart, surrounded by people leaning in as if he were the center of gravity. He always had that effect. He never missed a chance to remind me I came from Mom's first life, as he liked to say, when he thought I couldn't hear. He made sure everyone knew who belonged and who didn't. Elara touched my arm. "Just hold it together. We'll be fine." I wished I could believe her. I'd spent years swallowing my pride to keep the peace. I was always the first to apologize, even when I wasn't wrong, because someone had to make things smooth. Tonight, though, something in the air felt different, heavier. Elara stepped toward the seat beside the cheap chair, planning to sit down while people gathered. Before she could pull it out, Harlan moved across the room with surprising speed. His face had a reddish tint, the kind that came from too much bourbon or too much ego. He didn't slow. He shoved Elara so hard she crashed onto the floor. The room went silent. Even the music seemed to stop. "This seat is for my son. Get out," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Something inside me shifted, like a rope snapping after years of being pulled too tight. Elara tried to push herself up, her hands unsteady. She looked at me with eyes that weren't angry, just hurt. That expression alone felt like a punch to my ribs. I knelt beside her. "You all right?" My voice came out low, tight. She nodded once, brushing dust from her dress, as if that could erase what had happened. No one in the room moved toward us. No one said a word. Their silence spoke louder than Harlan's shove ever could. I helped her stand. My palms felt strangely warm, as if every emotion I'd buried had suddenly risen to the surface. I looked around the table at the familiar faces staring at us, the way people stare at a spill they don't want to clean. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just another holiday incident. This was the moment everything broke. I straightened up. For the first time in my life, I didn't apologize or explain. I didn't laugh it off to keep things comfortable for everyone else. I reached for Elora's hand, and we started walking toward the door. I heard whispers behind us, small and sharp, but I didn't turn back. As we stepped outside into the cold night, the air felt different, clean, honest. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this walk would be the start of something I should have done years ago. But what Harlan didn't know was that before the night ended, I would make a decision that would change his life forever. It started the moment Elora whispered, "Silas, you can't let him get away with this." Her voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it. We were barely through the apartment door when she said it. The Christmas lights in our window blinked softly behind her, but the warmth they gave off didn't reach either of us. I closed the door behind us with more force than I intended. Neither of us turned on the lights. The hallway glow from outside cast a faint yellow wash across the living room. Elora dropped her purse on the console table and slowly sank onto the couch. Her hand went straight to her wrist, rubbing where she hit the floor. I couldn't tell if it was pain or instinct. Maybe both. I stood in the middle of the room, not sure what to do with myself. My jacket was still on, my shoes damp from the walk through the snow. I stared at her, then at the floor, then finally sat across from her, elbows on my knees, fingers laced together like I was trying to keep myself from falling apart. I should have stopped him. The words escaped before I could stop them. The second he raised his voice, I should have stepped in. Elora didn't look up right away. When she did, her eyes were soft, but not forgiving. Silas, this wasn't just about tonight. It never was. I felt that sting, the one that comes when someone says something you already know but don't want to face. I stayed quiet. She went on. You've spent your whole life trying to please them, trying to make yourself small enough to fit in their world. But Harlan's always made it clear you're not welcome there. Not really. She sat up straighter, crossing one leg over the other. Do you remember that Thanksgiving 4 years ago? You offered to help in the kitchen, and he laughed and told everyone, Silas is better off not touching anything that doesn't come with an instruction manual. I did remember. I laughed along with everyone that night, shrugged it off like I always did. He's been doing this for years, she said gently, and you've been absorbing it like it was your job. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My chest felt heavy, my tongue thick. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling like maybe the right words would be up there. You always told me he was tough, but fair, Elora continued. But this isn't toughness, Silas. It's cruelty. And people like that only escalate when no one stops them. I rubbed my palms over my jeans, forcing a breath out through my nose. I didn't think he'd ever lay a hand on you. That's the thing. You didn't think, because you didn't want to see where this was heading. She was right. She was always right. And still, somehow, I kept hoping the next time would be different. Like, maybe if I smiled more, or laughed at the right joke, or brought the right wine, I'd finally earn my place. A memory surfaced. One I hadn't thought of in years. I was 10, I said quietly. I spent weeks making this photo collage for Mom, handmade the frame, picked pictures from our old albums. I wrapped it up, proud as hell. When I gave it to her that Christmas, she started to tear up. I paused. My voice cracked a little. Harlan looked at it, snorted, and said, "That's sweet, but maybe next year get her something that doesn't look like it came from a second-grade art class." Elora's eyes darkened. He pulled me aside and handed me a box with a scarf inside, told me to say it was from me instead. Said it would be better that way. "You never told me that." "I buried it," I admitted. I buried a lot of things. We sat in silence, the kind that stretches, not because there's nothing to say, but because too much has finally risen to the surface. Then Elora spoke again, carefully. "I didn't tell you this before, because I didn't want to hurt you. But last year, when we were walking our dog, I ran into Mrs. Langston across the street. We made small talk, and she asked how I was doing. Then she said something that stuck with me." I looked over at her. She said, "Your stepfather, he talks like Silas is some kind of burden." That word hit me like cold water. Not disappointment, not black sheep, burdened. So that's how they saw me. Not just inside that house, but outside it. It was never private. The shame had spread like a stain I didn't know was visible. I leaned forward, elbows on my thighs again, eyes fixed on the hardwood floor. Why did I let this go on for so long? Elora didn't answer. I wasn't really asking her. Why do I still care what my mother thinks? Why do I still want them to accept me? After everything? My voice was cracking now, the calm peeling off like old paint. I keep thinking, if I had done something different, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe he wouldn't hate me so much. "He doesn't hate you," she said softly. "He fears you." I looked up, confused. "He fears what you represent. That someone like you, a man with real empathy, with decency, might one day stand up and call him what he is." That silenced me. It landed in my chest like a key slipping into a lock that had never opened. She moved closer. Her voice gentler now, but firmer too. "If you don't stand up now, he'll do it again. And one day, he'll do it in front of our children. Or worse, to them." That was it. That was the line I hadn't thought about until now. Everything in me froze, then shifted. I felt the sting of what she said and the weight of what I'd allowed. It wasn't just about me anymore. I sat back, breathing slow, thinking deeper than I had in years. Tonight wasn't just the breaking point. It was the mask falling off. All the little humiliations, the slights, the whispered jokes, they weren't scattered moments. They were a pattern, a system. I started thinking not with feelings, but with clarity. No more defending his actions. No more shrinking. I sat in that silence, forming a plan I didn't yet understand fully, but I could feel it coming together like puzzle pieces I'd ignored for too long. And that's when I remembered the one thing Harlan never wanted me to find. The thought came back to me with a weight I couldn't ignore, and it carried me into the bedroom as if my body already knew where to go. A long-forgotten envelope my father left behind, tucked away in a drawer. Harlan always assumed I was too timid to touch. I opened the nightstand slowly, like I might scare the memory away if I moved too fast. The lamp cast a soft glow across the room as I sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope resting in my hands. The paper felt older than I remembered, rough at the corners, the ink on the front slightly faded. Elora followed quietly and took a seat beside me. The room felt suspended, almost like time had stepped out to give us space. My chest tightened with a mix of hope and dread. I hadn't pulled this envelope out in years. Maybe I didn't want to face what might be inside. Maybe part of me feared it wouldn't matter, that whatever my father left behind had already been erased by the man who came after him. I held the envelope for a moment before opening it, and my mind drifted to the memory of Dad. I saw him in the garage, a small space filled with tools and the soft hum of his old radio. I was 8, sitting on a stool while he worked late into the evening. He always made room for me, even when he was tired. He'd hand me a wrench, ask me to hold something steady, explain how things worked. No judgment, no irritation, just warmth. He passed before I turned 12. Mom remarried soon after, and the house shifted. Laughter turned careful. Conversations turned stiff. The space my father once filled became something Harlan used to control us. The envelope in my hands suddenly felt like a link back to someone who cared for me without condition. I slid my thumb under the seal and opened it. Inside were a few papers and a folded letter. The sight of my father's handwriting made my throat tighten. I unfolded the letter first. "My boy, this is for your future. Protect it." That was all he wrote. A simple message, but the tone carried something deliberate, almost urgent. I placed the letter gently beside me and looked at the next document. It was a photocopy of an early financial agreement. My eyes scanned the lines slowly. My name was listed next to a property my father co-owned with my uncle. According to this document, I was meant to inherit a portion of it. But I never knew about this, and the property had been sold years ago. Elara leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. "Silas, the dates don't line up with what your stepfather told you." She pointed at a signature block. "And look here. This was drawn up before Harlan even came into the picture." The realization hit hard. He told me the property was never in my name, that it was handled before I was old enough to be involved. "He told you what benefited him," she said quietly, "not what was true." My pulse picked up, a slow, steady climb. I set the paper down and leaned back, trying to breathe through the storm rising in my chest. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom of this, something else surfaced. Then another memory surfaced, one I had buried deeper than the rest. I was 15, standing at the top of the stairs late at night, unable to sleep. Mom and Harlan were arguing downstairs. His voice carried through the house. "As long as that boy has his father's assets tied to him, he'll always think he deserves a place here." Back then, I didn't know what he meant. I only knew his tone made me feel small, like I'd done something wrong by existing. Now the meaning hit me clear as day. He saw me as a threat, not a son, not even a person, a barrier. I rubbed my palms along my thighs, grounding myself. "So he hid this," I murmured. "He made sure I'd never know what my father intended. And he acted like you were greedy every time you tried to understand the family finances," Elara added. "He wanted you to doubt yourself." I looked down at the papers again, the weight of years settling over me. This wasn't random cruelty. It was intentional, layered, consistent. Every slight at every holiday, every time he corrected my story in front of guests, every time he dismissed something I said, it all pointed in one direction. He needed me to believe I didn't belong. Elara rested a hand on my arm. "You spent your whole life thinking you didn't have a place in that house. But what if that was the lie he needed you to believe?" Her words settled deep inside me. Something in me shifted then. Slow, but undeniable. It wasn't a burst of anger. It was clarity. A slow awakening that felt like the ground beneath me leveling out for the first time in years. I gathered the papers back into the envelope with careful hands. My father had tried to give me something, and Harlan had taken it. Not just the property, not just the letter. He had taken the belief that I had a right to stand in my own family. I exhaled a long breath, feeling my resolve harden. I wasn't done looking, not even close. And that's when I realized there was one more place I hadn't searched: the attic of my mother's house. If Harlan hid anything, that attic was the only place it could still be. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark for hours, replaying conversations, glancing at the envelope on the nightstand like it might change if I looked again. Elara eventually drifted off beside me, exhausted from the night before, her hand still resting gently on my arm. But my mind didn't rest. It was already ahead of me, back at that house, in that attic, turning over boxes. By 7:15 a.m., I was out the door. Milwaukee looked washed in steel gray, the sky dull and heavy, the streets still glistening from early frost. I kept the radio off and drove in silence, my breath visible in the car's stale heat. Every stop sign, every familiar turn felt like I was walking into a memory I didn't want to relive. But this wasn't about reliving anymore. It was about finding what had been hidden from me, and why. When I pulled into my mother's driveway, her house looked exactly as it had the night before. Too quiet, too still. A place that once held warmth now looked like a well-decorated lie. I rang the bell, half hoping no one would answer. The door creaked open. Mom stood there in her robe, eyes puffy like she hadn't slept either. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "Silas, you shouldn't have come back today." I met her gaze. "I need to go upstairs." She didn't move, but I could see her body tense, as if bracing for something. She glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway. "Harlan's not here right now, but he'll be back." "That's fine," I said. "I won't take long." She stepped aside slowly, hesitant. I walked in, the air colder than I remembered. The dining room came into view as I passed by, and that's when I noticed it. The table was still set. Forks, wine glasses, folded napkins, like the night had been frozen in time. Except one thing was missing. That mismatched chair, the cheap wooden one that was pushed toward the window. It was gone. They hadn't cleaned up. They hadn't cleared plates. But that chair? That had been dealt with. I paused, staring at the space it used to sit. My pulse spiked. That chair wasn't a mistake. It was a message. I turned toward the stairs. Mom stepped in my path. "He doesn't like people going up there. He keeps things private." That's exactly why I need to see it. She didn't fight me, just stood there, eyes glossy, hands trembling slightly. But she didn't say another word. The attic door creaked louder than I remembered. The pull string felt brittle in my hand as I yanked it down. The ladder unfolded with a groan. I climbed carefully, my shoulders tight, the air colder with each step. The attic was exactly as expected. Dusty, dim, filled with old boxes stacked in corners, some labeled, some not. I ducked under a slanted beam and scanned the far end, where the insulation curled slightly at the seams. One box, shoved in the corner, caught my eye. It was labeled Holiday. Decorations in faded black marker. I pulled it closer, pried the flaps open. No tinsel, no lights, no ornaments. Instead, bank statements, mortgage records, folders with real estate documents I'd never seen, and one thick file, stamped in red ink. My name was on the front, crossed out. I stared at it, my hands frozen midair. That was no accident. That was a decision. Inside the file, Pages of transactions, asset breakdowns, timelines. Some of the accounts were opened in my father's name, transferred years after his death. One document had a black sticky note across the signature line, ripped from something larger. What the hell? Then I saw it. A torn piece of paper, lodged behind the box. Just a corner, curled and yellowing. I pulled it out gently. It was part of a legal form, a trust agreement. My father's name was printed clearly near the top, followed by mine. The rest had been torn, specifically the bottom right corner where the signature should have been. On the back, scribbled in blue ink, my mother's handwriting. I'm sorry. I didn't move. For a full minute, I didn't breathe. That tiny sentence hit harder than every document in the box combined. She knew. I turned around as her voice floated up from the stairs. I told him not to go this far. I never wanted you hurt. She stood there in the attic opening, her face pale, her hands clenched in front of her. I couldn't read her expression fully. Part guilt, part fear, maybe both. You knew, I said. You knew he was keeping this from me. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to be ashamed. I held the torn paper between my fingers. He erased my father, and you let him. She stepped further into the attic, shaking. He told me it was safer for everyone, that keeping the past buried would give us peace. But I see now, it only protected him. A silence stretched between us, years of pain rising to the surface, words we never said floating in the air, unspoken. I didn't know how to stop him, she whispered. And maybe that was true. Maybe she was just as much a prisoner in that house as I'd been. But in that moment, sympathy was hard to find. I turned away. For the first time in my life, I understood. No one in this house had ever protected me. Not really. They preserved a system that worked for them. And I was collateral. I looked down at the document in my hand. Pieces were missing, but what remained was enough. Enough to know Harlan wouldn't stop, unless I stopped him first. But before I could confront him, he made the first move, and it hit harder than anything he'd done before. I gripped the steering wheel the whole way home, knuckles white against the leather, every muscle in my body tensed like I was bracing for a crash that had already happened. The houses passed in a blur, but my mind was locked on my mother's voice upstairs in that attic. I didn't know how to stop him. Over and over, I pulled into our parking spot, killed the engine, and just sat there. My chest felt hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and nothing was left but noise. When I finally stepped inside, Elara was in the kitchen, making tea. She looked at me and froze. Did you find anything? I nodded, too tired to form the right words. I dropped the folder onto the dining table and collapsed into a chair. My fingers were still cold. She walked over slowly, rubbing my back. Silas, what is it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. One image. No text, just a photo. The torn trust document. Same one I'd found in the attic. And then, seconds later, another message followed. Careful what you go looking for. You might lose more than you think. I stared at the screen. My stomach dropped. He knew. He already knew. I looked at Elara, trying to keep my voice even. He's already playing his game. Her face tightened. How would he even... Then her phone rang. She picked it up, said nothing for a few seconds, then, "Yes, he's home now." Pause. No, that's not true. When she hung up, she was shaking. That was Mrs. Dorr from down the hall. She said she heard Harlan's been calling neighbors. telling them you snapped at the Christmas party. Said you shoved me. I blinked. What? 3 people called me today, all of them asking if I'm safe, if you're unstable. I stood, stumbled backward like someone had hit me. So that's his move. Rewrite the story. He's trying to bury the truth under a pile of lies. I dropped to the floor. Right there. Just sat down, legs crossed, forehead in my hands like a kid who didn't know what came next. Everything inside me caved, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Why didn't she protect me? Why did I still want her to? Why did I spend decades trying to prove myself to people who didn't even see me? I'm the problem, I said quietly. Elara knelt beside me. Silas, don't. No, just listen. If I had just stayed quiet, if I hadn't gone looking, he would have erased you anyway. This has nothing to do with what you did. It's what he's always been doing. I couldn't meet her eyes. There was this pressure building in my chest, like all my life I'd been holding my breath. And now it was finally time to exhale. But there was no air to draw in. I didn't just feel lost. I felt erased. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time. I played it on. Speaker. It was Harlan. No yelling, no threats, just calm, smooth poison. You step out of line one more time, and I'll make sure everyone believes you're unstable. People already do. Don't embarrass your mother again. I don't know what hurt more, the threat or the confidence in his voice. Like he knew exactly how deep he'd gotten into me, like he had practiced this speech for years. Elara whispered, "He's trying to break you. Don't let him." I looked at her, and for the first time in days, I said what I really felt. Maybe it's easier if we just walk away from all of it. Him, the lies, my mother. She stared at me, eyes steady. Walking away is one thing. Being pushed out is another. And there it was. Truth wrapped in love, but still truth. I didn't respond. Just got up slowly, walked to the table, and picked up my father's letter again. His handwriting wasn't elegant, but it was steady, intentional. I ran my finger over the words he wrote near the end. This is for your future. Protect it. I used to think he meant money. Now I knew better. He meant me. He meant the part of me that still knew who I was before all this mess. Before Harlan's voice replaced my own. Before I started apologizing for simply existing. I looked at Elara again, voice quiet. My father left me something worth more than a house or a check. She nodded. He left you proof you were never what Harlan made you believe. And just like that, a thread of strength pulled taut inside me. I wasn't there yet. I wasn't whole. But something shifted. I stood a little straighter. Because that was the first moment I realized. Harlan wasn't just after money. He was after my identity. Realizing Harlan wasn't just after money, but after the core of who I was. That truth stayed with me through the night. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, his voice replayed in my mind, twisting everything he touched. By morning, I felt like I was walking into a day that had already been decided for me. And the very next day, he tried to take the last piece of it I had left. I got ready for work slower than usual. Elara noticed, but she didn't push. She handed me my coat, gave my arm a gentle squeeze, and said only, "Be careful today." Her tone made my stomach tighten. I kept thinking about that forged rumor. How fast he could rewrite a story. How fast people believed him. On the drive in, the city felt muted, like it was holding its breath with me. Milwaukee winters could do that. Freeze the world in place. I parked, walked toward the entrance, and tried to steady my thoughts. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Coworkers avoided looking at me. A pair of them at the coffee station stopped talking the second I approached. One of them murmured, "That's him," under their breath before turning away. I stood there a moment, feeling a familiar pit forming deep in my stomach. The same sensation I used to get when I was a kid and heard Harlan say my name from across the house. I sat down at my desk, tried to check my emails, tried to breathe normally. But I felt eyes on me. Curious eyes. Suspicious ones. 15 minutes later, I got a message. "Human Resources would like to speak with you." I felt my pulse kick up as I walked down the hallway. Inside the HR office, 2 supervisors waited, faces polite but stiff. They offered me a seat and slid a printed page toward me. "We received an anonymous complaint," one of them said. "It alleges you had an emotional outburst at a family event and physically endangered someone." The words barely made sense at first, then they landed with full clarity. This was Harlan's version of the story. He wasn't satisfied with poisoning my family or the neighbors. Now he was reaching into the one place he'd never touched. My job. I kept my voice steady. "That accusation isn't true. Nothing like that happened. My stepfather is trying to damage my reputation." They listened, but there was a distance there, a protective barrier they kept between themselves and whatever this situation might become. "We're not making any disciplinary decisions today," one said gently. "But until this is clarified, we ask that you maintain professional boundaries and avoid any personal conflict that might escalate." Professional boundaries. Personal conflict. They were telling me to stay quiet without saying it outright. When I left the office, the hallway felt longer than before. My chest felt hollow again, but not the same way as yesterday. This time, there was heat under it. Something starting to boil. By the time I drove home, my thoughts were a blur of disbelief and anger. Sharp, focused anger. Harlan reaching into my workplace meant he was done hiding. He wanted me cornered. Elara was waiting in the living room when I walked in. The look on her face told me something else had happened. "I need you to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. On the screen was an email thread. At the top, an outgoing message supposedly sent from my own account to Harlan. "I'm coming after you for what you owe me. You'll regret what you did." I read it twice, then again. "I didn't write this," I said. "I know," she replied. "He wants it to look like you're threatening him." My legs felt unsteady, so I pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. The forged message stared back at me, taunting me, as if daring me to react the way he wanted. "He's trying to build a case," I whispered. "Make me look unstable, dangerous." Elara nodded. "He wants control, and when he feels it slipping, he does this." I leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling a cold wave pass through my chest. If he's willing to forge emails now, he won't stop. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Imagine what he'll do when your mother isn't here anymore. He'll have no one to hide behind." Something in me shifted at that moment. Not a burst of rage. Something steadier. A line being drawn. A quiet acceptance that I had reached the point where backing down wasn't survival anymore. It was surrender. I straightened in my seat and pulled the items we'd gathered onto the table. My father's letter, the torn scrap from the attic, the mismatched files, the threatening messages, the forged email. Laid out together, they painted a picture I hadn't seen clearly until now. A pattern stretching across decades, an intentional erasure, and right there, I noticed something else too. For all his control, all his intimidation, all his careful planning. Harlan had made mistakes. He had acted fast. Too fast. His need to dominate the story made him careless, predictable, reckless. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to him. I was studying him. Elara watched me gather everything into a folder. "What are you thinking?" "That it's time," I said quietly. "I'm done being afraid of him." I met her eyes. "And I'm ready to expose him." But Harlan wasn't done. He struck again, harder this time, desperate to keep the truth buried. It was late afternoon when the message came through on my phone. Just 5 words from my mother. "We need to talk. Come now." No punctuation, no explanation. Elara and I exchanged a look that didn't need words. We grabbed our jackets and headed for the car. The ride over was quiet except for the sound of the heater clicking, fighting off the December chill. My mother's street looked the same, but I didn't. Not anymore. Something inside me had shifted. Whatever innocence or illusion I'd carried about this house and the people in it, it was gone. We pulled into the driveway. The porch light was already on, even though the sun hadn't quite dipped. I noticed the blinds were drawn. That was never her habit. Elara reached for my hand before I opened the car door. "Whatever this is, don't let him twist it." I nodded, even though part of me already felt twisted tight. Inside, the house looked staged, like a photo from a real estate listing. Cushions straightened, no coffee cups in sight. The smell of lemon cleaner hung in the air. That wasn't my mother's doing. I knew he was here before I heard his voice. My mother sat on the couch, stiff as a board. Her eyes were swollen, rimmed red, and her shoulders trembled ever so slightly. Her fingers fidgeted in her lap, trying to look still. When she looked up, her expression carried something close to apology, but layered under fear. Then Harlan appeared from the hallway, holding a printed piece of paper. I knew what it was before he even lifted it. The forged email. "I thought we should all see this," he said, voice calm, almost smug. "Your son threatened me. I'm considering pressing charges." My mother gasped, the kind of gasp that's half breath, half heartbreak. She looked at me, eyes pleading for clarity. I felt something crack in my chest. He wasn't just trying to discredit me now. He was trying to convict me. I stepped forward slowly. "That email was forged. You know it. And you know why." He smirked, didn't even blink. "You're unstable, Silas. This isn't about the past anymore. It's about what you're doing right now." He turned to my mother. "You need to decide, May. Your son is trying to burn this family down. If you don't choose a side now, he's going to drag us all into courtrooms and scandals." Her hands were shaking openly now. She pressed them together, like in prayer. "Please, both of you." But he wasn't pleading. He was cornering. He leaned in, calm and cold. "Think about what this will do to your health, May. All this stress. Your son doesn't care." And that was it. That was the move. Weaponizing her health, just like he always had. Subtle, sharp, manipulative. The same knife he'd used for decades. Guilt. I stepped back, jaw tight, heart racing. My skin felt hot. I needed to breathe. I turned to leave, to remove myself from the poison of it all. But Harlan stepped into the doorway, blocking the exit with his frame. "You dig any further into those old papers," he said, voice low and tight, "and I promise you, you won't like what happens next." Elara lunged forward, gripping my arm and pulling me back. "Silas, don't," she whispered. My mother stood up abruptly. Harlan, stop! His mask slipped for just a second. I saw it, the panic, the rage beneath the calm exterior. It was fleeting, but it was real. The desperation in his eyes betrayed him, and it told me everything I needed to know. He was scared. Only men who are losing control resort to threats. I didn't say another word, just looked at him, then at my mother. Her eyes met mine, filled with grief. She couldn't speak, but the tears running down her cheeks spoke for her. I stepped past him slowly, deliberately, and just before the screen door shut behind me, I turned back and said, "I'm not walking away this time. I love you, Mom, but I won't let him erase what Dad left us." No reply, just silence, and the sound of her quietly crying. We stepped onto the porch, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I felt hollow, but not broken. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen, and the message that appeared made everything explode. "You don't deserve what your father left you. Ask your mother about the night she signed it away." Attached was a blurry photo of a document I'd never seen before. The words weren't fully legible, but I could make out the heading, "Amendment to Trust Agreement." What sent a chill through me wasn't the content, it was the detail I almost missed. In the corner of the photo, barely visible in the glass frame behind the paper, was a reflection. A jacket sleeve, black wool, 2 brass buttons, Harlan's jacket. I zoomed in just to be sure. I'd seen him wear it that very afternoon. He must have taken this picture himself, sent it anonymously, too arrogant to realize he'd caught himself in the frame. Standing beside me on the porch, Elara leaned in. "That's his sleeve, isn't it?" I nodded once. He just exposed himself. We didn't speak again on the drive. No music, no distractions, just headlights cutting through dusk and the kind of silence that feels more like a storm gathering than calm. We headed straight to the community center, a squat brick building 5 blocks from my mother's. Harlan had been bragging all week about some neighborhood fundraiser he was speaking at, posing as a civic leader, still playing the role of honorable man while tearing me apart behind the scenes. Now he was about to be seen for what he really was. The parking lot was half full. String lights dangled over the main entrance. I could hear faint music and muffled voices from inside. I checked my phone one last time, made sure the voicemail was queued up. My thumb hovered over the screen. Elara looked over. "This is your moment. Don't let him steal it." I opened the door and stepped into the building. The moment I walked in, conversations dimmed. People noticed me. Some looked away. Others gave me the kind of look reserved for car crashes or scandal headlines. A few leaned toward each other and whispered. Then I saw him. Harlan stood near the front of the room, drink in hand, mid-conversation. When he spotted me, his expression didn't flicker. That same tight-lipped smile, polished charm. The confidence of a man who thought he still had control. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the front, turned to face the crowd, and without saying a word, hit play on my phone. Harlan's voice filled the room. "You step out of line one more time, and I'll make sure everyone believes you're unstable. People already do. Don't embarrass your mother again." Silence followed, but not the stunned kind. It was the heavy kind. The kind that says they heard it, they understood it, and something inside them just shifted. I watched Harlan. His smile wavered. The corner of his mouth twitched. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "That recording is fake. He doctored it. He's been unstable for years. This isn't new. It's just louder." But his voice cracked on that last word. His hands, Always steady, always calculating, were trembling. A woman near the snack table whispered, "That's him on the tape, though. You can hear it's him." Another voice added, "He sounds threatening." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. I pulled up the photo on my phone, the one with the document and the jacket reflection, and held it high for everyone to see. "This came to me tonight. An anonymous message says my mother signed away part of my father's trust." I turned the phone slightly. "But look here," I said, zooming in on the reflection. "See that sleeve? 2 brass buttons. That's Harlan's jacket, the one he's wearing right now." Gasps, murmurs. I continued, voice steady. "I found torn legal papers hidden in my parents' attic. My name crossed out in red marker. I found a letter from my father, handwritten, telling me to protect what he left us." I reached into my coat and pulled the folded paper out, then read the final line aloud. "Protect it. Don't let anyone rewrite what we built together." Silence again. But this time, it felt like justice was breathing down Harlan's neck. I looked over toward the doorway. My mother was there, pale, trembling, barely able to keep her composure. But she didn't leave. She didn't stop me. She heard every word. Someone from the board, a man I barely knew but had seen at countless events, walked over to Harlan and gently tapped his arm. "Maybe we should step outside," he said quietly. Harlan didn't argue. He didn't speak. He just turned and followed, his face drained of all color. I didn't move. People whispered behind me now, but the tone had shifted. "Financial audit," someone muttered. "Forgery's a felony." "He's done," someone else said. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't even breathe deeply. I just looked down at the phone in my hand, then back at the room. "You spent years trying to erase me," I said, not loudly, just enough to be heard. "Tonight, you erased yourself." Because even after Harlan fell, the damage he left behind didn't disappear. I barely slept that night. Not from regret, but from the sheer weight of it all crashing down. My mind wouldn't stop running, even as the house stood still in the quiet hours of morning. I got out of bed just before dawn, and the light from my phone screen almost blinded me. 73 missed calls. Some were from my mother, others from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. A few were numbers I didn't recognize, all of them from people who'd seen or heard what happened. I scrolled until one voicemail stood out, my mother's name glowing at the top. I hesitated, then pressed play. Her voice came through, small and strained. "Silas. I didn't know what he did. I swear I didn't know. Please, call me. We need to talk." I sat on the edge of the bed, that message hanging in the room like a fog. She sounded broken, but that didn't erase what she let happen. For years, I put the phone down without calling her back. Not yet. Not before I was ready to face what I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Later that morning, I heard a knock at the door. Elara was still asleep, curled up in the blanket we kept on the couch. I stepped over quietly and opened it. 2 people stood there, both from the Community Foundation's board. Stern, but not unkind. "We thought it best to inform you in person," one of them said. "Harlan has been formally suspended. A forensic audit is underway." The other added, "Because of the documents you submitted, the letter, the trust amendment, you now have legal standing in the property decisions moving forward." I thanked them, though I barely heard the rest. My body was still. But inside, something felt unanchored, like I'd spent so long bracing for impact that when the crash finally came, I didn't know how to move. After they left, I put on my coat and walked down to the lake. The December wind snapped at my face, but the sky was clear and the water calm. I found an empty bench and sat down, letting the cold keep me present. It was here that I remembered that night, years ago, when I overheard Harlan in the hallway saying to someone on the phone, "He's not built for anything serious. I need a real son at my side." Back then, those words gutted me. I was just a teenager. I carried them like stones in my pockets. But now they felt hollow, like an insult shouted by a man standing on crumbling ground. I whispered, just loud enough for the lake to hear. I never needed to be his son. I just needed to stop letting him define me. Footsteps approached from behind. I didn't need to turn. I knew it was Elara. She sat beside me, pulled my coat collar tighter around my neck, and tucked her hand into mine. We sat there like that for a long while. No need to speak. The silence didn't ache the way it used to. Eventually, I said, "I thought beating him would fix everything." But it didn't. I feel lighter, but not healed. She didn't flinch, didn't rush to fill the space. Then she said, "Healing isn't the reward for winning. It's the work you do after you stop losing." I let that settle. She was right. The damage wasn't undone. It was just out in the open now. My phone buzzed again. It was her. This time, I answered. Her voice cracked the second I said hello. She apologized, again, admitted she had been afraid of Harlan, afraid of losing what little peace she thought she had. I didn't scream, didn't unload. I told her gently, "I'm not ready to come back into the family circle, but I'm ready to start by telling the truth, my truth." She cried softly, said she understood, said she'd wait. It didn't fix anything, not really. But it felt like something new. Not a bridge rebuilt, but maybe the first stone laid in a better direction. That night, back home, I took out the envelope one last time. My father's letter, creased, worn, stained by time and fingers that clung too tightly for too long. I laid it flat, smoothed the edges, placed it into a protective folder, and locked it away in the desk drawer. Not to hide it, to protect it. He wrote those words for a future he never saw. And somehow, they still carried me when everything else collapsed. I closed the drawer, turned out the light, and stood by the window for a while. I used to think the worst thing a man could be was overlooked. Turns out, the worst thing is believing the people who overlook you. I looked out at the lake again, still quiet and cold, but the sky was wide open above it. I am not the same man who walked out of that Christmas party. And maybe one day I'll sit at a Christmas table again, not because someone saved me a seat, but because I finally chose where I belong.